From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Donald Trump faces a looming deadline to pick a running mate and a potential vice president. What do we make of the three reported finalists? Meantime, Joe Biden gives a news conference amid a NATO summit in Washington. But will his performance calm any fears about whether he's up for a vigorous campaign and another 4 years in the Oval Office? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. The Republican National Convention is set to gather next week in Milwaukee, and perhaps the biggest outstanding question still is the identity of the person who will be standing with Donald Trump at that convention and possibly in the White House for the next 4 years. Let's start with a clip of Donald Trump this week discussing the three reported finalists on the Brian Kilmeade show on Fox Radio.
Word is that you won't pick J.D. Vance because of his facial hair. Is that true?
No,
facial hair
I've never heard that one.
Number two,
no.
Doug Burgum, the thing that hurts.
Like a young Abraham Lincoln.
Right, he's a handsome man. Doug Burgum,
he's a nice guy.
On abortion in North Dakota, he signed something legislation handed him. Does that hurt him?
Well, it's a little bit of an issue. It's a pretty strong ban. You know, I think Doug is great, but it is a strong. He's taken a very strong stance, or the state has. I don't know if it's Doug, but the state has.
Yeah.
It's an issue.
And lastly, Marco Rubio.
An issue.
You know, Marco Rubio and being from Florida, would that stop you from picking him?
No, but it does make it more complicated. You know, you do that and it makes it more complicated. There are people that don't have that complication. Now it's fairly easily fixed, but you have to do something with delegates or there has to be a resignation, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like picking some people where it's very easy, where there is none of that. Florida, meaning two people can't be running on the same ticket. You actually can, but they take delegates. And taking delegates is, you know, a very risky thing to do, right?
Kim, we'll give you the first crack at this trio. It's getting pretty late in the process, and as far as I know, Donald Trump has not said when he will make this announcement. But what do you make of the three finalists that he is reportedly considering?
Just to set the stage here, I think it's really important. This decision, I mean, vice presidents are always important picks because you're choosing someone that in the event anything happens to the president will become the new commander in chief. So you obviously care about it in terms of their basic capacity. And then sometimes as well, they matter to the upcoming election. Traditionally, presidents or candidates have chosen vice presidents on the basis of whether they can win them a state or win them over a certain demographic. This one, I think, has even more importance because Donald Trump, should he win, can only serve 4 years. And so the person he's choosing is essentially going to be the standard bearer for the party going forward. And that's notable because a couple of the guys that are on that short list very much represent a small but vocal wing of the party that's become much more populist and moved away from its free market, free people, Reagan ideals. So that would be Vance and Rubio. Both of them are big fans of top-down industrial policy, big fans of tariffs, including ones that I think could be very problematic. Both of them are fans of handouts for people, only the type that conservatives want, you know, big new money for having children and child tax credits, very corporate bashing. And I certainly have a lot of complaints about corporate America, but this veers into knocking on success and capitalism and free markets. So those are my concerns with them. I think more generally, and this is, I think, bodes in favor of Doug Burgum, if there is indeed just three on the list, getting someone that, in fact, is a compliment to Trump on his tax cutting and deregulatory impulses would be better for the party in the long run. Not only that, I think getting someone that is a little bit different than him in style and substance would be helpful for him in terms of that demographic that he still struggles with out there, which are moderates, suburbanites who like his policies but are more concerned with his character and personality.
I guess I tend to agree with that analysis. If you split the discussion up into politics and policy. A choice of J.D. Vance, it seems to me, would be gilding the MAGA lily for Donald Trump. It's choosing somebody who has gone all in on populism, opposing a Japanese acquisition of U.S. steel, talking about how Republicans need to be for workers and unions and so forth. And at the same time, I don't know what J.D. Vance would bring on the politics side, because I don't think he would reassure any of the kind of suburban voters that have fled the GOP in the Donald Trump era. On Marco Rubio, I agree again with Kim that he has gone a little bit into the populist mode as well. One story, this is from 2021 in the Journal, Marco Rubio voiced his support for union organizing drive at an Amazon warehouse in Alabama, saying the days of conservatives being taken for granted by the business community are over. On the other hand, I see a political case for him in that he can be a dynamic speaker, a dynamic figure, a generational change, a young Hispanic from Florida standing behind President Trump. I get the appeal of that. And on Doug Burgum, it seems like he has pluses on both sides of the ledger, at least in my mind, Bill, in that he's a constitutionalist. He can talk about energy and jobs and, repealing regulation, his record in North Dakota. And at the same time, I think he comes across as a normal Midwestern guy who got into politics, not a smooth-talking politician, in a way that might reassure some voters who are skeptical about Trump, but maybe open to voting for him. I don't know what you make of that framing, Bill.
Yeah, I largely agree with both of you. To me, it's even simpler. I prefer for people running for president or vice president that they have executive experience as governors. And I really have a distaste for senators. It's a different dynamic. J.D. Vance, in addition to being in the Senate only 2 years, not a lot of experience, I think he's too much of a hot wire for Donald Trump. He's a lot like Donald Trump, so it doesn't bring anything that broadens out the party that way. And I don't think Donald Trump wants someone who may challenge him just by being there in disagreement. I think he wants someone more subservient in his way. Doug Burgum, I agree with his policies of the three men. He's the closest to my point of view. Free market, strong defense, and so forth. He's also quiet. I think he radiates competence and dignity. And he's kind of almost what Mike Pence was to Trump. He had a lot of credibility with Republicans, traditional Republicans. So I think Burgum, from my point of view, would be the safest. I think there's also a real possibility that Donald Trump wants to surprise us and he'll pick someone else, maybe Glenn Youngkin. I think he could pick Nikki Haley, even if he didn't like her. I mean, history is full of presidents not liking their vice presidential pick. Go back to Kennedy and LBJ and so forth, but they do it out of necessity. I think Trump likes a surprise, so I wouldn't be surprised if he had picked someone not on that list. But to me, Doug Burgum is reassuring. Look, the first rule with the vice president is first do no harm. And it's amazing how often we've forgotten that. So I think he's a safe pick. I don't think there'd be a bump in the polls if he went up, but nor do I think the Trump campaign would get in trouble for stuff Doug Burgum said.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. Let's hear a bit from each of these men. Let's start with Doug Burgum on Fox News. He has argued consistently in the wake of the overturning of Roe v. Wade that abortion should be a state issue. In one of those debates in the Republican primaries, he even held up a pocket constitution and urged people to read the 10th Amendment. Let's hear him on Fox News arguing that there's no difference between him and Donald Trump on that question.
President Trump and I, there's zero daylight between his position and mine. So if he's going to pick someone to run with, pick someone who's already had the position that he's landed on, which is I'm absolutely and totally opposed to a federal abortion ban. I ran on that as president. When I was running for president last fall, I made that very clear that I was opposed to that. That's in the record. Read the Wall Street Journal today. Read the New York Post today. So he and I are completely aligned. And he's brought the Republican Party to a spot where he's taken this issue off the table.
Let's listen now to Marco Rubio on CNN, asked about his chances in these sweepstakes.
I've heard nothing. I know nothing, and you probably know more than I do about it. Donald Trump has a decision to make. He'll make it when he needs to make it. He'll make a good decision. I know for certain that I will be out there over the next 3 or 4 months working on behalf of his campaign in some capacity. I know that I'll be in the Senate, and I'll have an opportunity to continue to do that. And either way, all I care about at this point and what I care about the most is that we can't afford another 4 years like the last 4, and I'm willing to help in any way I can. And but as far as making an announcement, that's up to him and their campaign, and I don't have one for you this morning, that's for sure.
And here is J.D. Vance recently on Fox News.
It's an incredible honor to be considered with those guys. I think Donald Trump has got a lot of talented people we could choose from. And the most important thing, of course, is just that we reelect him, because that's what matters, is redelivering peace and prosperity for the American people. And I think all of us believe that Donald Trump can do that because he has done that.
Kim, what do you make of the idea that Bill raised that it's not just limited to these 3, and maybe Donald Trump will surprise everybody, Glenn Youngkin, or maybe somebody we haven't mentioned yet?
I think it's totally possible. We had on a podcast I did earlier this week, Michael Whatley, the RNC chair, and he said, yeah, there has been a lot of talk about those 3 people. There's been a lot of talk about a lot of other people, too. And that would be in keeping with Donald Trump and his love of keeping everyone hanging on the edge, having the big tease, sometimes a bit of misdirection. I do not doubt, given all the chatter, that these 3 are certainly being looked at with a great deal of consideration. And I do think you have to ask the question of, can you go through the process of really interviewing someone, making sure that you are comfortable with them, doing all the vetting? It takes a team to do that, and it does become a little harder to think that you can do that without anybody getting wind of it. That being said, vice presidential choices in the past have always been a pretty closely maintained secret, and there have been some surprises over the years. And Donald Trump is someone that also changes his mind right up until the last minute. I always remember someone telling a story when he was in office. People used to try to hang out in the hall to be the last person to go in to see him, because often the last person he talked to, that was who he agreed with in the end. And so I think it's possible that a decision hasn't been made, and we could all be surprised.
But part of what has been fascinating to watch throughout this presidential race is how the thinking about the strategy has changed, because before President Biden's disastrous debate late last month with President Trump, the race was looking pretty competitive, and the arguments were that Donald Trump needed to pick somebody who would shore up his weaknesses, reassure swing voters. And now the polls are showing him pretty clearly as a front runner in the Real Clear Politics list of recent polls. There's only one that I am seeing recently, Bill, that has Biden up by 2 points. The rest of them are Trump +6, Trump +3, Trump +2. The average now in the Real Clear Politics polling overview is Trump +2.9. And yet, Bill, that could still change. We're still a long way from November, and there still is some possibility that President Biden could decide to step aside, and he might not even be the nominee on the ballot.
Yeah, and you look at the voters that are changing, it's independents. And look at the country. We're very polarized. Democrats are for one thing, Republicans very clearly for something else. If you're undecided about those 2 picks and you're caught in the middle, I think by definition, you're more malleable. You're more likely to change your mind several times. So the polls can go back and forth over the next few months. I don't think any lead is guaranteed now. It's very soft and liable to change. So I think we're going to see this for the rest of the campaign.
Let's turn to that question of President Biden. He had a news conference amid the NATO summit in Washington on Thursday evening. And one of the questions, a main question, was going to be, how did he perform? How did he look? Did he speak in a way that was more State of the Union Joe Biden or more debate Joe Biden? And Kim, what's your verdict on that question? Do you think that his performance will reassure any of these skeptical Democrats that he has the legs to go through November and through the next 4 years?
It was a very uneven performance. He had a couple of high-profile flubs. Even before the press conference, he'd been moving to introduce the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, referred to him instead as President Putin, the guy who actually invaded his country. So that was a bit of a whoops. He did correct himself. By the end, he caught himself and fixed it. And during the press conference, he referred to his vice president as Vice President Trump when he was asked a question about Kamala Harris. And at other places, he, I would say, was slow, lots of use of the words anyway as he gathered his thoughts. Then again, he was asked a couple of foreign policy questions and did speak with some depth about some issues. I think this leaves Democrats in the worst possible world because it's essentially purgatory. There were many Democrats, they understood that he was not going to come out on that stage and suddenly look like a 30-year-old man, 35-year-old man, even a 50-year-old man. I don't think that there was any version of today's Joe Biden that would have put all these doubts away. And in that regard, there were some Democrats who were therefore hoping that he was going to come out and fall on his face, and it would give them all the reason they needed to now jointly all come out and ask him to withdraw. Instead, they got something in the middle. It wasn't anywhere near as bad as a debate performance, but it certainly signals a lot of concerns and very much holds out the possibility that he could have a couple more very bad nights and ones that might come when it's too late to change him on the ticket. So they're muddling along and there isn't any decision yet.